Are bagged cars reliable? What are the pros and cons of adding air suspension to your cool classic or modern car? How do they work? And what do you need to know before you make the leap? And that's what we're talking about today, right, Case?
Yeah, because that's a question that we've seen a lot. We've tested even some off-road vehicles that had air suspension, and we've seen a lot of comments from people saying air suspension is not reliable, it's a bad idea, it's something that's gonna leave you stranded on a trail. But I've had an air suspension system on this car, and it's a system that I bought in 2015.
Yeah.
So I've been running it for quite a while.
Yeah.
We can talk a little bit about what it's like in the long term.
It's pretty cool. So 10 years later, how does a bagged Mercedes hold up? Because Case has had some problems to talk about. He's had some maintenance items he has to do. And we'll also talk about ride quality, because that's a big thing, especially with a beautiful classic like this. Does it change the experience? So Case, talk me through the basics of quote unquote bagging a car. How does it work and what do folks need to know?
Well, with a system like this, basically what you're going to do is replace the coil springs with air bags. So they're thick rubber bladders that fill up with air. So it's height adjustable. This particular system has wheel position sensors in each corner. So you can program in preset heights. So what'll happen with this car is if I am driving it by myself, I go to pick up a couple people and say 2 people get in on the passenger side of the car, and it starts to lean a little bit toward that side. After a certain amount of time, the air suspension system will compensate for that. So it always keeps the car level, which is kind of cool. It compensates for whatever load you're putting into the car. It's a pretty interesting, sophisticated system. It does add complexity. So if simplicity and durability is your main selling point, then coil springs are just going to be simpler. But you do get a lot of adjustability in the suspension and, like you mentioned briefly, good ride quality.
Now, one of the coolest parts, obviously the reason a lot of folks do them, is that they want to slam their car, right, and change the ride height. So Alex, why don't you go over to the passenger side and Case will show you how the actual controls for, in this case, the AccuAir system works.
Yeah, now this is something that a lot of people really don't like, that I put this system on this car. But at the end of the day, it's my car, and what they think doesn't really matter. So I've got my presets here. 2 is the default height, so when I flip the key, that's what the car automatically goes to, but I can press this 1, and it's probably worth backing off to see what happens when I press the 1, because it's more interesting to see it from over there.
Yeah.
So then you can bring the car down. This is how you would want to store the car if you're gonna leave it for a while. If you're not going to drive it for a couple weeks, go ahead and let the air out of the bags. There's also the air tank in the rear that you can let all the air out of. So there's a little valve at the bottom of the tank that would be hard to see, but you can let the air out of that.
Whoa!
I've got 2 Vire compressors set up here. And then all the electronics here. Ultimately, this, as long as it's been on this car, I still haven't gone through the process of cleaning this up to make it look nicer.
Sure.
It's just one of those things.
So Case, there's kind of a lot to these setups. So you already talked about the actual airbags, right?
Yep.
But then does the tank kind of hold air for when you need it? Like how does the tank play into the system?
Yeah, so the tank is going to store enough air so that when we flip the key to go driving, it has enough air to get the car up to the driving height. Then the pumps will kick on and replenish the tank for the next time that it airs down and airs back up. And the cool thing about at least this particular kit, the system that I got for the car, is that it's all reversible. So I still have the coil springs that I took off of the car. At any point, if I want to move back over to the coil springs and away from the air, I can do that, for all you purists out there that are very concerned.
I mean, is there any cutting you have to do to mount the bags to the suspension?
Not really. I mean, you have to mount the lines. So there's a couple points where you have to mount the actual clamps that hold the air lines that go through, and if you really wanted to be OCD about it, you could plug weld those and respray over it. The whole car is resprayed anyway, so it's not like it's a fresh off the factory line Survivor unrestored thing.
So one of the cool things about the system too is you can, in case you're that control, you can set predetermined ride heights, right?
Yeah.
So you could have it look like a bone stock 280 SEL.
Yeah.
Or you could slam it down at the car show and make it look super, super cool, and then anywhere in between, right? And you could pre-program that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it gives you full control over it. I mean, if I want to go on that switch panel and I want to lift up the rear end or lift up the front end individually, or one corner, one side of the car. I mean, you can make it do.
You can make it dance.
Thing. Yeah. It doesn't really move quickly enough to dance, but you can basically set the suspension wherever you want it to be.
So the big question is, nearly 10 years later and thousands of miles later and a lot of cycles up and down,
Yep.
walk me through the reliability. How has it actually been long term?
Yeah, so really the biggest maintenance item over time has been this, and I actually was working on it recently, which is why it's currently not mounted up where it usually lives. But this is the manifold that actually moves air around, and there are some moving parts in there. There are some seals. And so recently I went through and did a bit of work to it, replaced the seals, which is actually not super difficult to do. So a little maintenance item there. And I've done that one other time in the last 10 years.
Okay.
That for me has really been it. There's not tons that you have to do with the system to keep it running. Mine has been pretty solid over the last 10 years. As far as keeping things happy and running on this car goes, the suspension is one of the easier ones.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Now, Alex, you want to come around here so we're not blinding people? And let's talk about some other aspects before we take it for a spin. Do you know how much, 10 years is a lot of changes, 10 years, but what do you think it would cost to do this today? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, so a kit like this, so I'm not affiliated with them, especially because I bought this kit when I was still in high school, so I wasn't affiliated with anybody. Yeah. But there's a company called BC Fab that makes a kit specifically for this car.
Yeah.
So they make the perches and everything that allow you to place bags into the factory coil spring locations, so you really don't have to modify a whole lot about the car's suspension itself, the stuff that's actually built into the car itself. And that kit depends on what system you use to manage it. This is an AccuAir setup, and I like the way that their air management system is laid out. That kit for this car with the AccuAir is a little over $3,000.
Okay.
So it's not a cheap suspension system to do, but it opens up the ability for you to adjust the ride height to your liking, to have the car compensate for whatever loads that you put into it, and then you've got the nice air suspension ride quality. Again, it's not for everybody. There's plenty of people out there that see something like this aired out and they're like, oh, that's the worst thing that's ever happened to an automobile in the history of time. And that's fine. If that's where you live, cool. That's
go buy your own dang car.
All well and good, but yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love the way that it drives with the air suspension. And it's fun taking it to a car show, dropping it down. It just doesn't look like much else in a parking lot.
Well, let's take it for a spin, Case, and we'll show the fine folks in the real world how it performs.
Yeah.
So I will fully admit, when I first met Case and this car, me being a little bit of a purist, I was also kind of on the fence about it. But really what sold me in kind of realizing that this is a cool setup is it rides very close, if not better, to how the factory 280 SEL rode, which was really a big surprise to me.
Yeah, it's one of the nice things about having an air suspension in any car, and whether it's a factory thing like in your Land Rover LR3 or something that you've done aftermarket, is that air suspensions tend to be very plush, very luxurious. I mean, we've had a lot of luxury cars by the office that are running a factory air suspension system. It's kind of the go-to technology for making a luxury car with a really nice ride. Another thing that I think is kind of fun and kind of interesting is that the 300 SEL version of this car, so the next step up in this car's lineup when it was new, that ran a Citroën hydropneumatic suspension. So it was kind of like a earlier version basically of an air suspension. If you want to boil it down to really simple terms, it works very differently than an air suspension because it's not air, but it still used bladders basically that it would inflate with fluid.
Yeah.
I don't really know how the hydropneumatic one works.
You're on the right track, Case.
Yeah, it's something like that, right, Tommy?
So this noise we're hearing, this compressor that's in the trunk, does that run all the time when you're driving? Or?
No.
Okay.
No, so it runs for the first minute or two that you're driving, just to build up pressure again in that tank, and then once the pressure is built up, it won't run again until you drop below a certain threshold for how much pressure is in your tank. So yeah, I mean, day to day, when I typically take this car somewhere, I'll go to the grocery store, go to a restaurant, grab dinner, and unless I'm going to be there for a long time, I'll usually leave the car aired up. So a lot of times I'll have the pump run first thing in the morning when I take the car out, and it won't run again until the next day that I drive it.
Now, do you find yourself like constantly looking for air leaks? That would be one of my concerns when you're converting a vehicle like this.
I mean, I will say, so I installed this system myself, and I did it back in high school. Yikes. So it's not perfect. If you walk away from it, if you walk away from this car for 3-4 hours, you'll notice, especially the front end, which has a lot more weight on it, when you go back and cycle it, it will just pump the front end up another couple inches back to where it was while you were driving it. So if you leave it long enough, yeah, if you leave it long enough, it will lose air over time.
But not to the point where you're like trying to track down what's causing it. I mean, would you like it to stay high for longer?
Yeah, you know, I think somebody who's worked with a lot of these systems, installed a lot of these systems, could probably set it up in such a way that it would not lose any air over time, but the air that it does lose happens slowly enough that it's never really been a big issue for me. If I were to take this on a road trip, not that I would, it's not really the vehicle for it. If I were to take it on a road trip, then maybe after 6 hours, I don't know, even then, I mean, the pump would be running so infrequently to keep it aired up.
It's not really a problem.
It's not a problem.
So, I mean, I think what we want to emphasize is one of the big advantages of the system is you get that really cool slant look, right?
If you want that.
If you want that, or you don't have to.
Yeah, just good ride quality.
But you can have that, but then also be able to make turns and clear bumps, because I don't think we could have driven around when it's in its very lowest position, right?
No, for sure not.
Yeah.
When it's in its lowest position, for one, the frame and especially the exhaust is pretty close to the ground. When it's aired out, the tires are tucked far enough up in the fenders that I've never really moved it back and forth much not aired up. I think the tires will spin if the wheels are straight, but you wouldn't be able to turn the front wheels at all.
Oh, gotcha. So it's not a practical
because they're
thing.
tucked so far into the fenders. You would not be able to drive it that way.
So let's do a quick recap here, Case. Would you recommend this system, and would you do it again?
For sure, yeah. I really enjoy it. I have fun. I mean, just some of the looks on people's faces when you pull up somewhere and air it out has given me a good chuckle many times over the last decade. And yeah, just knowing that if I ever want to go back to a factory suspension on this car, I can. But the fact that it just has that extra element and makes for a car that's even nicer to ride in, even nicer to drive, makes it a fun system. Should we hop out?
Yeah, let's hop out here and we'll close this up. So look, I was really skeptical when I first kind of saw this as well, but I have to say that it's so good from a ride quality standpoint that I'm pretty sold. And the best part is, like, if you wanted just to look like a stock car, you just push a button and it can, which is awesome. So big win, I think, for me. Case, has had a couple little problems, but nothing to the point where he's come into the office being like, oh, I hate this system.
Yeah, I mean, I spend more time every year over the last 10 years doing oil changes on this car than I have working on the suspension. So as far as maintenance being a factor for me, it's really not even something to factor.
Well, drop us a comment below. I'm sure you will anyways, what you think. And this has been Tommy and Case. We'll see you next time. Check out alltfl.com for more reviews.